Hey, so I'm here at Logee's with Byron Martin, and it is a very brisk morning today. Yeah, so you can probably see our breath a little bit as we're talking about Schlumbergeras today, which is Christmas, Thanksgiving, and Easter cactus. They're quite similar, and they are jungle cactus, and these are things that I feel like parents and grandparents had Christmas and Thanksgiving cactus growing all the time. It's something that I think that we've always seen in the market and is also very common during Thanksgiving or Christmas. Depending on when it's flowering. And so I thought we'd actually talk a little bit about their propagation, their care, and also how to get them to rebloom again.
Right. These are, as you mentioned, jungle cactus, and they're epiphytic for the most part. And so, you know, they're very tolerant to dryness. That's why they've survived in houses for so many years, right, generations. And their flowering cycle is initiated by basically the decrease in day length. And there is some chilling that also helps induce the flowering, but really it's a day length issue. And so as the days shorten and we get to 13 hours of daylight and we start to go below that, that's what stimulates flower production on them. So in a home, they can be put into areas that are perhaps a little darker with less of the ambient indoor light affecting them during after hours or after the darkness. But they're not as sensitive as, say, the poinsettia, which is, you know, if you have lights on in a room, it will not flower again. They have a relatively low threshold to, you know, artificial light coming in on them. So really, they actually do it on their own. And for those of us that grow them, you see them in the house, and then all of a sudden one day you look at them and these little bumps are forming at the tips of the pads, and there we go. We started over again, and really quite easy. I think the biggest issue with growing them, other than never watering them, which would, you know, eventually desiccate, but is they get overwatered. Maybe a pot plugs up and the moisture stays too high, and then you lose your root system. And the symptom of that is all of a sudden you see a lot of shriveling on these pads. And if you knock the pot out, you'd find that the root system is pretty well damaged. And they can actually come back from that if you care for them, dry them down, and so on. Yeah, but quite easy to grow, and usually once the flowering cycle is over, they'll go back into growth. And during that growing period, you want to add some fertilizer to them. And it is that time of year, right after flowering, that you can do the pruning. So many of these plants, like these are 2-year-olds. Yep. So they were potted last, their cuttings were taken last the spring of 2018. And then they were potted, they were grown, potted, and now they've come through an entire cycle of growth on that. And they've gone back into bloom. And you know, they have this kind of weeping habit, so as soon as you're done with the flowering cycle on them, they can be pruned back anytime between that point and the time they start to flush out that new spring growth.
And let's also talk about like because these are phylloclades, right? These are like a flattened stem that they have, and they're segmented. So after they have their blooms, how far would you actually cut them back?
Well, it would only be to cut them back enough to manage them wherever you're growing them. Right, okay. Otherwise, let them be what they are. But they can get pretty big. And
I've seen them huge.
Yeah, and they start spreading down. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just let it be. But if you do need to contain them because you don't have you have limited space and such as that, then that's the time to prune them. And then there's a flush of new growth, and it's on that new growth that we take our cuttings. So it's these little pads that we take, and usually the cutting is only, well, we have some young ones here. Yeah. And usually the cutting is only this right here, this one little pad. Okay. I mean, if you can be generous with it. Yeah. Usually in high production, we're trying to get as much as we can out of one plant, so we'll take one pad. You can put 2 on there, and that's the beginning. And that plant that you took, which would be springtime or late winter once they've started to flush again, will actually be the flowering plant for the next season. So they'll grow again during the summer. They'll put on maybe, yeah, that was probably the cutting there. This actually might have a more than one cycle of growth on to it.
Yeah, it looks like it might.
You can see, and it's starting to throw out another one right here. And generally, if you wanted to, in the industry, what we do is we put multiple cuttings in a pot so that they, quickly fill it out within one cycle of growth. And then that crop goes in, begins to, as they are flowering right now, which it goes into Thanksgiving and Christmas.
So they're not as sensitive then to light in your home, like you said, it couldn't compare to the poinsettia.
I would say that if you can't flower them, it's probably disruption of day length.
Yeah.
Often recommended is to put them in a cool spot, but generally if you have them in an area where, they're next to a window and the fall comes and you leave the window open some, they're getting that chill. In the greenhouses here, we actually just turn the heat down in the greenhouse and we get that what we would call about a 50, 55 degree night as they go into the flowering cycle.
Now, I've seen people growing their Schlumbergeras in a little bit more of like western exposure all the way to kind of northern or eastern exposure. I mean, I even know my mother pulled it away from an eastern window on her desk, and it was a little bit further away from light, and it would always grow and flower just fine. So tell me a little bit about the light. Also, if you have light, sometimes they can redden up as well.
Right, so these are jungle cactus that grow in the trees, and they don't grow at the very top of the trees, like many epiphytics are down under the canopy some. And so they do prefer lower light. And if you grow them in full sun, bright sun, they will grow, but they'll be all yellow. And they won't even be red, they'll actually turn yellow. And you can put as much feed on them as you want and they'll still be yellow. It's like orchids do that. Right. So they do prefer shade. The thing with the really low light, it kind of gets them a little stretchy and loose in their growth. So if you increase the light a little bit, it tightens them up some. Not really that important, but in terms of form and culture, you try to give them. In the greenhouses here, we actually shade them during the summertime. So they're growing in a greenhouse with clear glazing above, and we put shade over the top of them. And that greens them up, and they actually prefer that.
And let's just finally talk about some of the hybrids, because this this genus has really been hybridized quite a lot over the years. And of course, there's a lot of jungle cactus out here, but I think one of the things that is really attractive about this one is that they do have some really bombastic and beautiful blooms. Yeah. And what are some of the ones that you have kind of in culture now that maybe other people don't?
Well, there's been, as you mentioned, there's been a huge amount of hybridizing over the years with these plants, and there's a lot of cultivars that have fallen off and new ones come in and so on. The colors of pink, red, and white, and then all the mixtures in between them. Some of them have two-tone colors to them. We have a few varieties that are double, and those you can't find those in the trade.
So like double flowers?
Double flowers, yeah, big, thick, puffy flowers on the end of them. And so, we continue to grow those ourselves. Basically, and it's interesting, it's a commodity, so there's really big growers doing it, but there's some smaller growers that, have done it for a number of years, and they've gotten some of the hybridizing going on their own, and we source some of our plant material from these sort of odd niches in the industry, and it gives us a little more diversity in what we're growing. But as you say, and they're really a very much of a mix of genes in terms of their hybridizing, because there's probably 4 or 5 species, and then those have been crossed together many times, and selections have been done off of them. So you can even look at the pads on them, like this one here, which is aspen. It has kind of a thick, heavy stem to it. And then, you look at these are much thinner. Some of them are rounder. They don't have the points on them.
Yeah, it's really hard, I find, to find the parentage of some of the plants.
You can't. No, and the thing is they bred them to the point where
they hybridized them with the other hybrids too.
Yeah, and then everybody forgot about it. So it's just a mixture. But really, in terms of culture, it's all the same. We get these to flower at the same cycle every year by the decreasing day length.
Yeah. Well, this has been really good. I mean, I think that this is a lot of a wealth of information for a plant that is just so iconic, and that I think that we've had for, like you said, just like generations and generations. So thank you so much, Byron.
Yeah, thank you.
Interested in developing a deeper relationship with the people and plants around you? Then check out my book, How to Make a Plant Love You. Cultivate green space in your home and heart. More information up on my blog at homesteadbrooklyn.com. And if you're looking for more tactical plant care, then you could turn to the Houseplant Masterclass, which is the first online audiovisual course on houseplant cultivation, care, maintenance, and more at houseplantmasterclass.com.